All right, I think we're online. We're in the interwebs. So welcome to the Governance Across Ecosystems panel. I'm going to be your moderator for this panel at ZCon. I'm Peter Van Valkenburg. I'm on the board of directors of the Zcash Foundation, and my day job is as a lawyer at Coin Center, which is a nonprofit focused on talking to sort of governance 1.0, i.e. the US government, and telling them about governance 2.0, as I feel really awkward using 1.0 and 2.0 in retrospect, which maybe is, what we're doing on these crazy decentralized networks. Although we're probably at like 5.0 and like the US government is like 4.0. And okay, I'm going to stop now. So I wanted to start because we've got this excellent panel of people who are, even the terminology here is awkward because, it's not like we've got a bunch of CEOs of major corporations or anything like that, because we're talking about crypto land. So we don't have a bunch of CEOs, but we've got a bunch of prominent people in various crypto communities, apart from Zcash. I mean, a lot of you guys have contributed and talked with us about Zcash and been incredibly helpful and generous, but you've got other homes as well. And I thought for a panel on governance across ecosystems, the best way to start would be for each of you to introduce yourselves and briefly say what community you primarily have affiliated yourself with over the last few years from crypto land. And then talk about the hardest governance decision, or the most interesting one maybe in recent times, and just give a brief summary of it, and then tell us how you were able to help resolve that, you personally, and then you as a community, how you saw the community resolve that. So I think we'll go from the order on my screen here, which would be Evan, then David, then Hudson, then Zaki.
I guess I'll start then. Hey, I'm Evan. I am the co-founder of O of One Labs. We were the team that built Mina Protocol, which recently is live and listed and launched and everything. I'm also on the board of the Mina Foundation, so I help out on that end too. Let's see. So I guess you can guess I'm probably most involved in the Mina Protocol community. And what's interesting is we've only been live like a little bit, so I won't have kind of like the full resolved story around a governance thing happening in Mina quite yet, but there is one going on in progress that I can share what it is and where we're at with it, which is we have a program where the foundation and other entities delegate to the community members based on how much uptime they have. So if you have a lot of uptime on your node, you get a delegation, great. Recently, the community raised that it seems pretty possible, maybe even easy, to cheat this system and just convince that everyone that you have 100% uptime, even though you really don't. Maybe you aren't even running a node, you're just kind of running some proxy server that's giving the right information, even though you're not really doing anything. And our process has been kind of this so far for it. Like I said, we're in the middle of it. Is so far we've kind of surfaced all the problems from the community, and we've asked the community to come up with proposals for how they think we should fix this. And this has turned into like, kind of like a list of so far like a dozen or so proposals we have internally that we now have that we can review. And where we're at with it is we're going to produce a summary of this to the community with a recommendation for their feedback on next steps. So maybe not the most exciting because we're still in the middle of it, but this is like our first kind of engagement with the community on like a really collaborative problem solving process where like the problem is real and like everyone knows there's like real stakes for it and people are weighing in, and I feel good about where we're going towards getting a solution. And yeah.
David.
Cool. Yes, my name is David. I primarily affiliate with the SIA community. I've been working in cryptocurrency for, I believe, 10 years now. We've crossed that anniversary. And with SIA specifically, we've had really, I think, two defining governance moments. The first was with the introduction of ASICs. We had a community-backed project called Obelisk. And then Bitmain came in with competing ASICs that were technologically much worse, but Bitmain had overproduced and oversold them. And so you had this situation, this really gnarly situation where like everyone who bought Bitmain was going to lose at least some money. And then if we forked to invalidate the Bitmain ASICs, they would lose a lot of money. And we had discussed internally as a dev team prior to this what we would do, and so we had determined as a dev team that we would fork the Bitmain ASICs off. We viewed it as an attack against the community because the community had kind of openly resolved around doing this open source way. Unfortunately, we hadn't disclosed this plan publicly, and I think that was, in hindsight, a really big mistake. We needed to have that conversation in the open, kind of in November when we started talking about it as a dev team. That we really should have talked about it in the open, and I think the community would have been 100% behind the idea of breaking Bitmain ASICs if we had decided it before Bitmain had announced that an ASIC had been created. Because we didn't, when it came out, the situation was a lot messier. There were people who had bought the Bitmain ASICs, and it was just this huge moral issue of like, you have to shoot one person or the other, and like no action would be let Bitmain kind of steamroll the ecosystem. And so initially we chose no action. We just felt that there wasn't clean consensus. And again, I think this was also a mistake. What happened was the core community substantially lost interest. And so it just kind of like a depression fell over the Sia community. So eventually we did decide to fork. This made a subset of the community extremely unhappy. They remain bitter towards us to this day. So again, it's like, these history, we never like fully cleaned up the mistakes. But the moment that the fork was executed, kind of the depression lifted from the community, and that core group was a lot more excited about Sia again. So it was kind of this big roundabout thing that I think, if we had been more experienced at governing decentralized ecosystems, there were several points where we made the wrong choice that I think today I have the experience to make the right choice from the get-go. And so we had a second big governance moment in the Sia community when we decided to add a developer fee. And so Sia, for its entire history, had been powered by a for-profit company, and for various reasons had no developer fee. And we determined that a developer fee was actually important. The for-profit company just couldn't justify to its investors spending money on basic things like ledger wallet support, or even certain basics to just make the currency side of the UX cleaner, because the currency side of Sia Coin had no feedback loop to the for-profit company. And so we made a dev fee because we wanted the ecosystem to have developers working on it full time, working on ecosystem health. And so we split the company into a for-profit, which I am the CEO of, and then a nonprofit, which my co-founder left the for-profit entity to lead the nonprofit entity. Both entities are doing well. And I think this is an example of governance executed where we didn't make mistakes. And basically my co-founder and I had long conversations with every single major stakeholder in the ecosystem that we could track down. A lot of it was Discord, a lot of it was email, a lot of it was phone calls, calling miners, talking to exchanges, talking to the most active people on Discord, talking to people on Twitter. And so we tried to be as thorough as possible and basically just compile all of the concerns and then address them to the best of our ability. And then, you never make everyone 100% happy. But unlike the previous fork, when we executed this fork, there was no dissenting faction. There were people who, maybe weren't 100% behind it, but they didn't feel caught off guard. They didn't feel hurt. They didn't feel attacked. They kind of begrudgingly went along with it, which I think is the best you can do. And I think that's an example of a key governance decision that was very difficult and could have been very controversial. But we were able to run that process just in an experienced way and kind of use all of the lessons we learned from the proof of work hard fork.
That's it.
Oh, it was me. Okay, great. Hey, I'm Hudson. I am involved in the Ethereum community and in the Zcash community as of late. And for the last 5 years, up until April, I guess, I worked at the Ethereum Foundation in a variety of roles. mostly dealing with the community and protocol developer liaison work, including being an editor for our standards protocols, EIPs, and running the bi-weekly core developer meetings. So I did a lot of interfacing with the community and have been involved in most major incidents since the DAO that Ethereum has gone under, sometimes, being kind of an in-between between the developers and the community, sometimes being part of the community. It just kind of varied. So the incident that I'm thinking of that kind of comes to mind as a difficult question that the protocol had to handle was what we call the ProgPow event. And what that was, excuse me, the ProgPow event was this. There was basically the first ASIC was built on I think it was by Bitmain, but for Ethereum in 2018 or 17, and there were people who were very against ASICs. There's been conversations in multiple crypto communities about ASICs kicking off GPU and hobbyist miners, and it would just become like ASICs taking over the whole network, and then there just being this monoliths of the only people who could get hash power on the network would be the large ASIC farms. So there was this group that came up. It was this like a semi-anonymous group, like 2 out of 3 members were anonymous, and they were called if def else. They created something called programmatic proof of work, which is an edit to ETH, which is Ethereum's mining algorithm. And basically what it did was it did a tweak to kick ASICs off the network, according to them. Now, there's been a lot of debate on if it would have worked or not, but the core issue was, would the community accept that we want to kick ASICs off the network? That's the decision. Do we want to do that or not? So this was in development for a while. It was on the core dev meetings, but there wasn't, and this is partly my fault, partly the fault of other people, there wasn't a lot of good communication with the community on what decisions were being made in the core developer meetings when it came to ProgPow, because we made a decision to go ahead with it. The core devs felt like it was enough of a threat to the ecosystem that ASICs were going to take over and kick GPU miners off, and then there would be these monoliths that we decided to go with it. So it was being built, and then suddenly I was like, hey, community, we're doing ProgPow, and this was like after a few meetings where we confirmed it, but like with kind of some people not caring and kind of wishy-washy attitudes toward it. And everyone got really mad at me and completely shot the messenger when you're not supposed to shoot the messenger. And so I got shot up. So did a few other people. And that was really difficult because there was a lot of yelling. And at the end of the day, what I determined, and this was after a ton of dev time spent, 2 audits. Basically, the community kept saying, like, we need an audit on this. Maybe it's malicious. There was all these conspiracy theories about these GPU companies paying if def else or influencing if def else to come up with these decisions. And at the end of the day, the community didn't feel heard. What really resonated with me was some podcast where there was a prominent community member who came on and said, we weren't consulted about this, so we're against it. So it's kind of one of those lessons learned that there needs to be a lot of good communication, and we've really improved upon that. We have some community members now who are actually paid to interface between the community and the core developers and the dApp developers in ways that I, even like didn't do in the past. So I think that it's, lessons learned, always inform the community of stuff, get them involved. And we're going to see if that was a good decision to not kick ASICs off or not, especially since we are moving to proof of stake pretty soon. It doesn't seem like no one's raised huge alarm flags lately, and we're moving to proof of stake hopefully sometime at the beginning of 2022. So yeah, that's kind of the big blow up that happened and is now resolved.
Zaki?
Hey, I'm Zaki Munyan. I am mostly known for my work in the Cosmos ecosystem. I'm also working on a DeFi project that is centered on Ethereum called Sommelier, but uses a bunch of Cosmos tech. So I have been, I've been involved in Cosmos governance Probably the biggest thing that people as far as I know, has received almost zero visibility outside of the Cosmos community, but represents like one of the sort of biggest debates that has been going on in the Cosmos community over the last year is Cosmos is one of those weird blockchain projects that we actually finished our white paper. So when we finished, so on, I believe it was March 13th of 2021, March 13th, 2021, like all of the features of Cosmos that were promised in the Cosmos white paper were done. And so that brings up this like somewhat existential question of what do we do now? Like what do we all work on? What is our software? What does the Cosmos Hub become? All of these questions sort of became relatively core, and they were basically broke down into like two camps. There was sort of the hub minimalist camp. And the hub minimalist camp was basically of the point of view that basically we should do some form of shared security so that atoms could secure other chains and do nothing else. And there was, I wouldn't call it the hub should do everything community, but there are some core additional features that weren't really obvious when we started working on Cosmos back in 2016 that are now clearly necessary for the hub to contribute to the success of Cosmos ecosystem and IBC, and for atoms to have utility and value in this ecosystem. And so this ended up being like a very like big debate, to like Jay Kwan, who was, the original sort of founder of the project, was on the minimalist side. Sunny, who's also a hugely influential person in the Cosmos ecosystem, has also been an advocate for the minimalist side. And it seems that to a large extent, the add features to the Cosmos Hub group has won. We are going to be launching a DEX on the Cosmos Hub very shortly. We are going to be in this very interesting place where Sunny is launching his own chain with his own DEX, roughly at the same time as the Cosmos Hub is launching their own DEX. There will be chaos. Who knows what will happen? But it has been like sort of one of the more interesting sort of like governance things, which is, and that was always the intent. The intent was finish the white paper, and then there would be a community governance process to kind of figure out what comes next. There is a roadmap that has slowly been working its way out into the world of what features that will be coming to the Cosmos Hub. But the hub is getting features that we believe will give atoms value. But that is where we are today. And that has been the biggest governance debate of Cosmos of late.
Cool. Yeah, and so there's a lot of common themes here, and a lot of them resonate with me in my experience in the Zcash community from a governance standpoint. I wanted to start with like a sort of level setting on what we even mean when we talk about governance in these communities. Like what has crypto governance been thus far? And from my perspective at Zcash Foundation, where I'm on the board of directors, a lot of it's summed up by something that Zuko actually said to me and a few others at the foundation really early on. And I'm probably misquoting him, so apologies, Zuko. But Zuko said something like, if you want power, you need a navy. And he's referencing something that some like British admiral once said, which is like, if you want power in the world, you need a navy. And of course, an island nation would say that, but it makes some sense. And what Zuko was talking about, I think, was sort of classical crypto governance as I see it, which is, look, this is open source code, right? That's what this world is. Anyone can suggest an edit to that code, can fork that code, can change it. It could be changing trivial things, or you could be changing really consequential things like consensus rules. And then what happens is you need the Navy to fork the code. So what he was talking about was like, we need software developers. And this was part of the motivation for the foundation to hire a bunch of software developers, which is not something that a normal US-based nonprofit would do, because the crypto world is a little different than the traditional nonprofit world. And then you got to convince others to run that code if it's different than the code that's out there already. And if you succeed and persist in having a non-trivial number of people run that code on their computers around the world, then you will have achieved some governance decision. And either the legacy code that doesn't match your code will persist, in which case now there's two, which is very interesting. You have a hard fork if you've changed consensus rules, or the other chain withers and dies, in which case you've shifted maybe the whole community without too many stragglers onto this new notion of the good, or notion of what the protocol should be. So I want to just throw that out there first. Like, does that ring true to you all as far as like classical crypto governance? And then we can talk about like, what can we do beyond that?
I think it's true to an extent. That I think that's how it works in practice, or not in practice. That's how it works in theory. In practice, what I see happening more is that people want to go where their friends are at the end of the day. And so a lot of the time, even though these communities persist, it's really hard to judge how many people are in those communities. So what you're saying, I guess, is true, but with the caveat of people like to go with their friends. And so wherever the most prominent people with the most friends are, that community is the one who's going to thrive more so than the other one.
I might even push back on the exact opposite direction and say that, the goal of decentralization is to make it so that you don't need a navy. The idea is that if you have a group of people that want to do things a certain way, it should be as easy as possible for them to go off and do that. And so one of the big concerns at Saya and thinking about governance is, if there's a dissenting minority that thinks, I'll just throw an example out there, proof of stake, right? So the most of the Saya core team is very heavily prefers proof of work, but it's completely reasonable that a subset of the community would very much want proof of stake as the model. And so from a governance perspective, and like as stewards of decentralization, it's kind of our mission to ask, how big does that minority need to be before it's practical for them to go off and do their own thing? And so we want to make sure that size is as small as possible, because ultimately we want people to go and build their own future. And then a secondary question would be like, if they do go off and do their own thing, how many lanes can we make between the two projects, so that the network effects are still there, and so that everyone gets as many advantages as possible.
Yeah, I find that fascinating. So I was on we did a little event at Mercatus. It was an academic conference about crypto and Hayek, the Austrian economics scholar. And at one point, Hirschleifer came up. Hirschleifer is this other economist who talked about sort of voting with your feet and exit versus voice. Like there's two modes of governance, he would say. And he was writing way before crypto. There's like, you can either exert voice within a community to change the community's mind, to persuade them, to change the laws, to change the systems, or you can exit, in which case you're saying, I just don't like your rules. I'm going to go off and form my own. And I said this, and Eric Voorhees was on the panel, or was on the discussion forum, and said, yeah, but crypto's better than exit versus voice because you can have both. Because when you exit a project, you don't just leave, you both persist. Like there's ETH Classic and there's Ether now, and those communities can continue to interact. So it's not really like exit in the full on, it shouldn't be, hopefully, exit on the full on, like I'm out, I'm gonna have nothing to do with you in the future. Can we share network effects between these projects and go off and create our own worlds while maintaining interoperability? I mean, Zachy, maybe you have something to say to that, given that Cosmos is designed to be a blockchain.
I have two things that are relevant to that. So I'll answer them in sort of, I'll come back to your question. It has a simple answer. So I'm going to do the more complicated thing, which is relevant to here, because one of the biggest changes, I think, in crypto governance that I've seen over maybe the last year or two, is that we have moved into a larger role for like large capital allocators in governance. In general, that like both protocols themselves, like the Cosmos Hub has on-chain governance, and like governance votes can allocate capital. Like there's a community fund that is allocated capital on like a per project basis via the community fund. And you have entities like the foundation, et cetera, who are able to who also allocate capital at scale And then you have a lot of funds, crypto funds, et cetera, that allocate capital around this. And the role of these protocols as coordination points between capital allocators, I think, has really changed what like governance looks like. You can, like, if the capital allocators like lose faith in the governance decisions of a protocol, like you can still have your software, but it doesn't allocate, like the capital, there's no more capital to allocate right now. And so we are in this like weird state, like, there are a lot of L1s and there are a lot of blockchains and there are a lot of protocols, and capital allocation decisions are constantly being made between them, and everyone is competing in a marketplace. And a lot of the same actors act across multiple chains. And it has become a lot more complex a world to have a total view on it. But like just coming back to the Cosmos example, I think the real reason why, having features on the hub is because capital allocators, that was what they both felt like, that was what was sort of aligned with their interests. And it was aligned with their goal of increasing the value of their assets. And those are, I think, two really important sort of aspects of governance. To go back to the question though, one of the things that we've been trying to do in Cosmos, as Cosmos was conceived sort of post, things like the DAO hard fork and Ethereum's governance debates. And in many ways, the design of the system is a response to them. And it was designed as, it is designed as a system as where if you disagree with governance, you can leave and build in your own direction, build your own chain, build your own thing. And so you have a number of core Cosmos contributors who I think have disagreements with governance, which is like one of the things that motivated them, who are building their own chains right now. You have the Sika team that is still very involved in the Cosmos Hub as well, building Osmosis, and you have the Cryptium team, which was one of our earliest validators, now building a competing chain on the Cosmos stack called Anoma. And so our vision has always been to like keep the discontents in the network and like maintain the networking effect. And that seems to be working.
Interesting. Yeah. The capital allocation aspect is interesting. One thing I think about a lot is how Bitcoin and to an extent Ethereum sort of hit the jackpot. And Hudson, you can feel free to disagree with me here or maybe not. But when you were one of these early cryptos, you ended up with a diffuse community of people who became highly enriched by the early success of the protocol and would then be able to just sort of sponsor public goods like protocol development with the sort of extra just capital that's lying around. It's sort of like a positive externality. It just happens in these communities because there's enough free floating capital that, weird projects can get funded and protocol maintenance can usually find a way to squeak by. Whereas in the smaller communities, and with the exception of Hudson and Ethereum, maybe we're all from sort of smaller communities, there's been more of a do or die moment. It's like less lately now that the markets have gone crazy again, but certainly in the few years before now, sort of like, and we've seen dev funds. We've seen, well, maybe we need to do more than just incentivizing miners. Maybe we need to incentivize software development by having the protocol actually reward developers. So like, is that dichotomy real? And what are the ways around that? Because I don't think I think we worry that the incentives can get perverse if it's all about number go up when capital allocators are the ones making development decisions, right?
Yeah, I think you're right that capital allocation plays a huge role in it, and that at Ethereum, there was a lot of people early on that are giving to public goods. Also, something that is really overlooked in a lot of these ecosystems is if you don't have native programmability in your blockchain, you don't allow for use cases beyond a few core ones to be built, and so you don't have sub communities. So a lot of these DeFi protocols that got built, they are giving millions of dollars to get coin in these public good funds, and they wouldn't even exist if you didn't have this general programmability.
Right.
Same thing with NFT use cases where they're raising a ton of money. So it's more than just capital allocation from like ICOs or block reward funding or stuff like that. It's beyond that. It's also the groups that rise up that aren't part of the core ecosystem because they don't have to be. They can do their own fun thing. But I actually am curious, Evan, what is Mina working on, or what is Mina doing about capital allocation stuff? I'm not as familiar with it. So like, is there kind of a core like block funding, or is it like pre-sale, or what's going on? You're muted.
Thanks. Yeah, so O of One, the company, raised funding around like building Mina like originally. So we have like that kind of as a pre-launch way of actually being able to build a project. And now we're at a stage where O of One has a pool of tokens, as does the Mina Foundation has a pool of tokens. So the idea is that we need to get to a point where we've bootstrapped the ecosystem enough where things are kind of naturally going the way that a lot of other projects are going. But to do that, we still need to, there's still like development work that needs to be done. There's community projects that need grants. So that's the plan for now, if that answers the question.
Absolutely.
So one thing worth raising here is going beyond sort of classical crypto governance, which is this like fork the code and convince people to run it, is in some communities, and especially in the smaller communities, we're seeing more formalization of roles, I think. So David, you brought up how, there was originally a for-profit and now there's a nonprofit as well, and they serve different functions and they play different roles. This is exactly what happened in the Zcash community maybe a year earlier, where we had the electronic coin company, which was originally developing the protocol, and we felt the need to have a Zcash foundation, which would represent the public good of the protocol, the financial privacy aspect, and maybe be a counterbalance to any perverse incentives from a for-profit. Evan, I want to toss it back to you. You're at the start, right? So like, have you thought about formalizing roles and having different functionaries within the ecosystem? Is that something you think would be successful? What are the early thoughts here? It's all
totally.
green pastures.
That's what I'm feeling as like we go through this call, is like we don't have many was stories. We just have like we're at the beginning and figuring it out.
So that's the best time in a way. It's before
it's
before people start shooting the messenger, as Hudson said.
the blue sky time is definitely really nice. So we were thinking about that a lot. So we'll be sharing more on this, I think, in the next like month or so. But a preview that to answer the question is that we are thinking of O of One as kind of the entity that's working on adoption, that's working on adding core functionality to the protocol in terms of being able for developers to be able to develop on top of it. And as a for-profit entity, really focusing on where can our Zcash smart technology be the most valuable for new products that want to build on decentralized apps. So that's the side for O of One, which is definitely for profit. And on the other side, we're thinking of the Mina Foundation definitely as this nonprofit that is mostly in charge of coordinating the community, that doesn't, in a sense, it doesn't really do anything. It's just mostly around how can we coordinate everyone around the material incentives that the protocol can give to have the best outcome. Yeah.
So we got a question from the chat, which I definitely want to bring up because it's actually something I wanted to discuss already. So a lot of times we have a sort of, I think, naive view of governance. And I'm saying like Zcash, but I'm also speaking crypto in general, that there's this notion that like voting is governance. And so in the Zcash community, we have a community advisory panel and they do just voting, like democracy. Then in other communities, we see like token voting. Can we find better feedback loops than just like identifying members of the community and having them vote, or identifying token holders and having them vote? Like, what are the better feedback loops to get more decentralized information into the people who help write code, and then get that stuff out there and change things or alter things?
Yeah, I can take this one, and I think I actually think of it kind of like Schrodinger's cat, where you have a governance decision, and then there's actually no way to measure how accurate it is reliably until you actually just go forward with it, and then you see how well you did based on if there's a fork, how big the fork is, and like the quote unquote fallout of the decision. And so I'm actually very, very against the idea of like tokens equals votes. And so when we did the foundation hard fork, we didn't have any voting anywhere. It was entirely basically me and Luke taking initiative as leaders in the community and saying like it's our job to find problems and then be the voice of the community. And so rather than doing any sort of voting, we just had like a month straight of heavy conversations with people about places where things were deficient and ways to improve it, and then understand, what's the problem with what Luke and I proposed, and then as we continued iterating on the proposals, we would go back to people who had signed off on previous versions, see if they liked the changes, like go back to people who didn't like previous versions, see if the new one was better, and so I think I would actually just say that like good leadership is really the way to go. Is and that's one of the reasons why I'm kind of it's not that I don't think DAOs are a great idea, but I think one of the challenges is that with a DAO, it's so easy to fall back to this, plutocracy style, like voting with your coins and having this governance coin that does voting. And I don't think that's the best way to do governance. And so I prefer these much softer, like leadership oriented decision making. That's more like Schrodinger's cat, and I think you can get the best result that way.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that. I think there's sometimes an embarrassment in the crypto community about things like some level of centralization in leadership, because it's not supposed to be that way, right? Or maybe you're afraid of things like regulatory consequences if you're taking on responsibilities in a visible way. But I think it's just better to do that and to do it in a visible way, like start a foundation like the Zcash Foundation, for example, and make a clear public goal. And then people can, see the work that you do, and hopefully you've maintained, fidelity to that public goal. But otherwise, I think a lot of things happen sort of in the shadows if you're not like owning up to that leadership role. And I do think the risk of plutocracy becomes greater. I also really love what Hudson said, though, about programmability being something that can actually be sort of an escape valve. Because I think a limit of leadership is some people just can't see the future possible ways. It's not so much that they're tyrannical, because I don't think there's too many people like that in our community, but you certainly might have blinders on and not see alternatives. And so to have this like area where weird shit can just pop up, which is probably the best way to describe Ethereum, seems to be like a great compliment to there still being strong people in the community who can play a leadership role. I don't know.
Yeah, I will just say that like one of my metrics for like the success of a project is frequently with Ethereum is like, is this a duct taped and bailware solution to like a bad governance decision? And if it is, it will probably succeed. So yeah.
The thing I wanted to bring up is, so Zaki, you mentioned like capital allocators as sort of like corporate raiders, like they come in and they reform projects, and maybe it's for the better, maybe for it's the worse, because it becomes all about the number go upism or incentives for getting the token to be valuable. I see another kind of raider emerging in our space, which is the Elon Musk, or maybe the Floyd Mayweather, like folks who are from outside crypto. Originally, I say Floyd Mayweather because I happened to be in Miami last weekend, and then I happened to try to get backstage when his entourage was back there, so I couldn't. It was like terrifying. I was like, "What is happening?" And like these people can actually exercise a huge amount of power, it seems, with some old cryptos like Dogecoin. Is this a threat to governance? Is this an opportunity? How do things change in governance decisions when we're suddenly much more mainstream than we used to be?
So I will say that like one of the biggest, there's a connection between two things, which is, so Hudson was like talking about, like in a governance decision, like we always like the messenger gets shot. And I think there's a general like, there's a general trend of like, if you were the face of a major governance decision in a decentralized protocol, you probably need a few months off from governance, if not longer. And so there's that piece. The second piece is sort of social quorum, whether or not you have a formal like quorum requirement for your on-chain governance, or just getting enough eyes and enough people paying attention to this governance decision that it has credibility and legitimacy, are some of the biggest struggles in governance, especially again with the sheer number of protocols that exist right now and the sheer number of governance decisions that I could potentially weigh in on in any given day, like exceeds the number of hours there are in the day. Like I could hire like 3 people and all they would do is like do governance stuff, and it still wouldn't be enough. So what this creates is an environment that where people who have large public followings are actually very advantaged in governance, because they can, I mean, like, I think all the people on this call all have this advantage in their like communities because they're followed by a lot of people. And like, I pushed a lot of governance stuff through Cosmos because like everybody follows me. And so I can generate the attention towards a governance proposal, and like governance proposals that don't have someone who's really willing to put their influence in. So all I'll say is this is, I think, the hardest piece of governance engineering, like whether or not we should have token voting or not. I have various opinions on, but it's like free to disagree. I think the hardest part is to build these systems in such a way that we somehow figure out how to countervail, right, these like really pathological questions about like visibility and quorum and legitimacy in governance decisions, and like clearly seeing the decay of the US democracy. Like no one has solved this problem.
So there's a question from the chat which like relates to this leadership question, and like maybe as a visible person in the community you can push for a decision. How do we deal with bad leaders though? Is there some sort of social construct or social contract rather between the leaders and the other individuals in the community that can be broken and then enforced?
Yes, I think this is where decentralization really shines through, is that strong leadership is not at odds with decentralization, and a community that has a very strong leadership can also be extremely decentralized. And kind of the test is that if there's a problem with the leadership and another leader comes forward, how easy is it for that leader to break off? And so I think in the you end up with factions. If some faction of your community thinks that the leadership is bad, what they need is an alternative leader who can either take over or split off. And if those things are possible, then you've kind of proven that you're decentralized.
Another question from the chat from Daria. Zcash is highly technical, and most of these protocols are very technical, although not all of them have what has been previously called moon math straight in them. Evan, yours does. A few others do. Is this a barrier to governance decisions? And I want to ask a corollary to that question, like how do we address that barrier? And then when you're thinking about your answer, tell me a little bit about responsible disclosure of bugs and how that fits in with governance, because I think there's usually a desire to make decisions more public, but sometimes if it's highly technical and it's about a bug, making it public before it's fixed could be a disaster.
Yeah, so at least with an Ethereum, I really love the fact that we have a technocracy basically. Like the core developers and some of the prominent leaders are the ones who make the decisions. I like that because there's not a better way right now, and it's worked out so far, and they are altruistic and listen to the community. As far as bug disclosure, everyone's going to have a different opinion, but I like the way that Geth has recently pivoted to sneaking in bug fixes for really critical errors, letting the other core teams and technical leaders who are trusted know, and then releasing a post-mortem after enough percentage of the network has upgraded.
Anyone else? Evan, in your blue skies period, have you started thinking about the inevitable day when a bug disclosure might be?
Yeah, we actually had one like maybe a month ago, so ago now. That it wasn't crazy severe or anything, but it would have allowed someone to potentially take down a small subset of nodes if they knew something very, very technical and specific about the protocol. I think the solution here is to have a really clear process around how you disclose bugs so that you can kind of pre-get everyone's consent, that because probably doesn't everyone want you posting like a critical vulnerability just like out in the open, like and saying, here's how to exploit it. They probably want some level of, hey, here's the severity, please upgrade, then we'll tell you more. I think that it's really about getting consent to the process. And that's how we've been thinking about it.
All right, we're down to 1 minute, so I want to do a rapid round. Zuko's in the chat talking about friendly forks. One thing that Zuko said once that still fascinated me is like, we've never seen two cryptos merge. We just see forks. So I'm not going to ask you about friendly forks because it's a vague term, but I am going to ask you all, will we ever see cryptos merge? All right, Evan, and then David, then Hudson, then Zaki.
I'm so curious what everyone else has to say. It's just so complicated technically to imagine how you would do this outside of bridging. Like, and I think bridging is going to happen, but if merge means like merge, like single ledger, I'm doubtful from a technical perspective.
I think it'll happen. I don't know how or when. Probably sooner than later. It probably won't look like what you expect, but eventually it should happen. There's just too many people with too many weird ideas.
Yeah, so the Keep project and New Cipher, if y'all look that up, they're doing that right now, although it's on a lower level than L1. That's kind of an interesting thing of how they came to that decision. It's a good use case.
Zaki, last word.
So I was gonna bring up the Keanu merger. There are technical mechanisms that are feasible for mergers on Cosmos. So I suspect that eventually those will be used, like Cosmos chains could conceivably like merge tokens. I also think that you will see some L1s give up being their own L1 and decide to be hosted on other people's platforms. And that will increasingly happen as well.
Cool. All right. Thank you all for the discussion. It's been fascinating.
Thank you, Peter.